So now that you have an understanding of the concept of normal flow, we can begin to see how normal flow relates to the positioning properties and their offsets. The first type of positioning we're going to look at is relative positioning. And I like to look at relative positioning first because I think it's the most confusing of all of the positioning properties. Essentially, relative positioning, the terminology is what bothers me. The W3C, the people over there, I tell you, I don't think they're always thinking on their feet, Either that or they get into arguments and they have to come up with something, that they think makes sense and they have consensus. But this sometimes ends up in bad nomenclature. And when I think of something relative, I think of one of two things. I either ask the question, well, if this is positioned relatively, then what is it relative to?
Yeah, positioned relatively according to what?
To what? Yeah. Is it relative to another element? Right? Which is my natural instinct.
I think that's the natural instinct of a lot of people.
Absolutely. That's something that I hear from people all the time is that, well, I thought it meant I could position it in relation to, relative to this other element on the page. And that's not at all what it is. So that's a very confusing thing. The other thing I think of when I hear the word relative is, relative font sizing and how we use relative, values to be able to increase and decrease sizes of fonts and even images, whatever, on the page. So that terminology is kind of misused, and I think as a result, there's a lot of confusion going on about what relative positioning is. And of course, relative positioning is kind of quirky and odd, and you wonder why you'd use it at all in most cases. But let's go ahead and take a look at how it works. First, before we actually add any CSS, let's go ahead and view the baseline layout, which is essentially what we were looking at in the last example when we looked at normal flow. We have a paragraph here, followed by an image, followed by another paragraph. And of course, there's some padding margins coming in from our global style sheet that bear no weight with what we're doing in these examples. So hop on back into my code editor, and I'm going to drag in a snippet here using Dreamweaver, and I'm going to position my image relative to the left of 200 pixels and from the top 100 pixels. So 200 pixels from the left, 100 pixels from the top, but the position is relative. So you're going to see what happens when we have invoked that. These are called offsets, by the way. This is the position property. This is the kind of position value. And then you use offsets, left, top. You also have right, bottom. And you can use those offsets to position any page element. So let's go ahead and save this file and flip on over to Firefox and give this a refresh. And as we can see, now the image has moved from the position it was in over to the offsets that we have decided. But you'll notice something interesting has occurred here. A couple of interesting things, really. First of all, the image has just dropped down wherever we've told it to go. And because this is in the normal flow, you can see that everything will move when we flow the document. The other thing is that there's all this space left behind. So what's really very interesting to think about is that relative positioning is not being positioned relative to any other element, but what it's being positioned in relation to is the normal flow of the document. It's being taken out of where it was in the normal flow, being placed where we've offset it to, but leaving its space behind in the normal flow of the document. So it is positioned relative to itself in the normal flow, not to any other element.
So positioned relative to where the element would normally have been in the flow.
Exactly.
Where it would have been had you not moved it.
Exactly. So it's simply offset from where it is, but the thing to be aware of is it leaves that gap still, okay? The page acts as though that element is still where it was as opposed to where we put it. And that's a very important and key concept of positioning.